In this video, I'm going to show you how I make these hot pads. Um, I belong to a quilting circle with a group of ladies, mostly my age, some younger, some older, and we quilt. And one of our ladies passed away, and when her family had finished going through all of her quilts and her sewing supplies and everything, they gave what was left to the quilting circle. And we looked it over, and each of us was able to pick a project that she had not quite completed and finish it for ourselves. But there were some odds and ends left, like orphan quilt blocks. Orphan quilt blocks happen when you make too many quilt blocks. You see a pattern you want to try, and you try it, and maybe you finish a quilt with it, and maybe you don't. Anyway, so I took some of the orphan quilt blocks and put them into a nice little hot pad. This is one. I love this one. This is really pretty. I like this one a lot. And in this case, all I had was two little quilt blocks like this. Added a couple more squares, and I got a block big enough for a hot pad. And one more. This one was a little too big, and I actually cut it down a little bit so it would be a more reasonable hot pad. I have one block left, and I was debating what to do with it because it's kind of for a baby, but nobody needs a burp cloth. And so we decided that what we would do is we would turn it into a hot pad. Now, the stuffing in the hot pad, I use lots of different things. I use leftover batting from other projects, other quilt projects. But one of the more interesting ones I use are these little decorative snow sheets that I get at the Dollar General or the Dollar Store or the Dollar Tree, one of those little places, after Christmas. And I think I usually give about a dime a piece for these little bits of batting, and they're all neatly cut for me, and all I have to do is just fold them right. Now, this one has glitter on it, which is okay. We're going to put it in a hot pad, but if I turn it the other way around, the glitter will be on the inside. Now, I use polyester in my hot pads. They tend to not pick up as much moisture and get wet, and therefore burn your hands when you're picking up something hot. Some people insist on using cotton. It's up to you. Hot pads get used and discarded when they get burned or they get old and whatever. These are for use and not for display. So if I use this batting, all I have to do is just lay it down, and it's about thick enough, and I'll show you how we go from there. I'm going to set it on the non-folded side like this. We take our scissors and we cut it. All I have to do is just trim the excess off, and there should be enough left to do something with. Now, I need a backing, and I was debating which of these two backings to use, this one or this one. I already have picked the outside that I'm going to finish it with, and I think I like this one because it's nice and bright, and this is a very bright little quilt block. I suppose she was going to do a baby quilt with it. So all I do is I lay my piece down like this, get my pins, and pin it. Once pinned, I can just trim the excess off. And I'm going to also trim some of this excess off. Now that I have it trimmed, it's time to quilt. To quilt this, I'm going to put enough stitches in it that it will hold it together nicely, so when it's used as a hot pad it will not separate. And to do that, I'm just going to stitch down each of the seam lines all the way around and catch them all. I'm going to start and I'll be back. I have finished quilting it, and in the corners here where I had this small little square, I wanted to make sure that it stayed down and was very nice and tight. So I sewed a diagonal. But if you look at it carefully, the diagonal does not go from seam to seam. It goes about 1/4 of an inch below the seam to 1/4 of an inch below the other seam. The reason for that is when I put the binding on, the binding will come down here, and if I had finished it here, my diagonal would not have been square. It would have been off square. As you can see here, when I put the binding on it, it's going to be square. My next thing that I do, I have a serger, and I love my serger. My machine here only does a straight stitch, but because I have a serger, I don't really need a zigzag. But if you do not have a serger, you can use a zigzag. Very carefully zigzag this down. It will just make it easier for you. For me, I'm going to use my serger, and I'll be right back. Okay, I have a small piece of binding for the outside. I finished serging the outside and cutting off all of the excess fabric and batting. This is a piece of fabric that I had cut for a quilt binding, but the quilt binding was a little bit too wide. For my hot pads, I like to use about 1 3/4 inches. So I cut this leftover binding, quilt binding, down a little bit. What we're going to do is we're going to trim the selvage, and then we're going to take our pins and we're going to fold it in half and lay it alongside, oops, wrong side, lay it alongside the back. Okay, butt it right up to the edge, and we're going to pin it. And we're going to go all the way down to the other end, giving it a fold as we go, and pin it. Now, sometimes I don't bother pinning, but I've done lots of these hot pads. I like a simple hot pad that I can hold in my hands, and when it's served its useful life, I can discard it. Anyway, now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew from here down to here. Now, I'm going to sew up to that little line here where I have serged it. That's all the further I'm going to go. And I'm going to back stitch here. Now I'll do that and be right back. Okay, that's finished. Now I'm going to fold my binding a little bit farther and stick a pin in it. That's just to keep it straight. And then I'm going to take a diagonal. I'm going to pin a diagonal pin right there. I'm going to lift it back like this. Okay, and so I've got a real nice diagonal. I can adjust that pin a little bit so that it's really a nice diagonal. I'm going to pin it. Then if you see this edge right here, I'm going to fold it down to just where it's slightly above that. Oh, maybe a 1/16, not an 1/8, but maybe a 1/16 of an inch. And pin it. I'm going to pin it well because I want it to stay there. All right. Now, I can remove that pin. Then I'm going to pin this side. And I'm going to do that all the way around. When I come to a corner, I'm going to stop, fold it, pin it, and stitch it. I'm going to sew this and I'll be right back. Remember, I'm only going to sew up to this approximately 1/4 of an inch from the end. Back stitch and then cut the threads. Now let me show you what that does. It makes a perfect mitered corner. When I open it up on the back side, it looks like that, and on the front side, when I trim it a little bit on the corner, I can get a gorgeous mitered corner. Anyway, I'm going to finish the other two, but there's one thing that we're going to do special on the last one. I'm ready to do the third corner, but what we're going to do on the third corner is the last one is just a little different. Let me show you. When we started, we left just a tiny bit of an edge there, and we're going to turn that over and we're going to pin it in place like that. Now we're going to finish the last side, pin it in place, and we're going to come over where we started and stitch that down. That's why we put the pin on the other side. We want it to be finished. We're going to pin it, and then we're going to look, and we want about 6 inches or so. We want enough to make a loop, and that's about enough to make a loop right here. So we're going to cut the excess off, just have a little bit of extra, and then we're going to pin it all the way down. This just makes turning that loop easier, that's all. Now I'm going to stitch this and I'll be right back. There we go. Now what do we do with this? We're going to trim the edge right here. We left a little tail there. Now we're going to pin. We're going to pin all the way around. Okay, we're going from the back side to the front side. We're going to just set our pins in like that. Just enough pins, okay? Now, this is a tight binding. You'll probably have to push and stretch a little bit. If you want a looser binding, okay, you could make this just a little bit wider. Up here, what we're going to do is we're going to turn that into, what would you call it? That's where our loop for hanging the pot holder is going to be. And we're going to pin it. Now, I'm not going to show you how I pin the whole thing, but we're going to start here and we're going to finish our loop first so that it's all in one piece. Now we're going to go to our corners. We have 3 more corners here, and I like to just nip a little bit of that off just to make it easier to do the corner. Now we're going to pull this up tight. We're going to pin it. And then we're going to bend that over. Notice how nice and neat that little corner is. Can you see that? When we stitch that down, it'll be perfection. If they don't come out real neat, you can play with them a little bit and get them to look better. But you want to just trim a little bit off the tip so you have a little less fabric to put in that corner. You do this side first so that when you sew it, you are not trying to sew over a bump, because you will go from this side to this side and your little bump will be covered there. Get some of my stuff up in there. Pin that. Pin it. It does take practice to get these corners just right. Just try them. Sometimes when I'm doing a new one that I haven't done before, like a different width here, I will do the corner and see how it's going to turn first before I try to finish the others. If I don't like it, I'll just take that out and work again so that I get the amount of overhang here correct. Remember, we're making a hot pad, not a quilt. Hopefully this won't get passed down to our grandchildren or anything. I hope these get used. And there we go. We got the last corner here. Roll it. I think I got this one a little bit deep, but I think it's going to work anyway. We'll just tug it and push it hard. And put a few extra pins in. There we go. Now, I have finished pinning. And we're going to start sewing right here at the tip here. Let me do that. And I will go all the way around, making sure I catch all my points just ever so carefully, turning them carefully, and I'll be right back. I've gone all the way around and it looks pretty good. I think I need to go back and catch that edge, and I'll do that after this video. So I'm going to pull all my pins. Now, what am I going to do with this little tail? Let me show you. You're going to take the little tail, you're going to swing it around like this. You're going to fold it under like that and set it right there. Now, I'm going to pin it so that it's nice and centered like that. And I'm going to do a handful of stitches back and forth. You don't want it too close to the corner because you'll have trouble sewing it. About like that. And I'm going to stitch it right here. I'm going to start in the middle. Don't try to start on the edge. Put your first stitches in the middle, go forward, go backward, go forward, go backward, and that should be enough. All right. There's my little hot pad, all finished. And like I said, I missed a spot over here, right here, and I'm going to go back and catch that a little bit better. I missed it right there. Because this is yellow on yellow, it's a little hard to see, and I missed it right here too. So I'm going to do that. And if you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe. I make these hot pads all the time, and I gift them frequently. And these hot pads will go to the ladies at the Quilting Circle, And every time they pull a pan of cookies out of their oven, they'll remember our friend Anne. Thank you very much.